Hello, I'm Kate Milliken, and welcome to MS Learn Online. Recent preliminary studies have suggested that a phenomenon called CCSVI may contribute to nervous system damage in MS. To help us learn more about this, we have Dr. Jerry Wolinsky, a neurologist at the University of Texas Health Science Center and chair of the National MS Society's National Clinical Advisory Board. Welcome to MS Learn Online, Dr. Wolinsky. Let's start by just having you define what CCSVI is.
Well, let me take this, and you'll understand why we call it CCSVI in just a moment. So that means chronic cerebrospinal venous insufficiency, CCSVI. And what it is really stems from an observation made by Professor Zamboni in Italy, where he was investigating patients with MS, amongst others, and noted that there were abnormalities found when he listened to and visualized the flow in the vessels that bring the blood out of the brain, as well as looking at some of the deep cerebral veins that collect the blood from the brain and then drain it into the neck and into the heart. And felt that these abnormalities might be contributing to the disease process. That work was published and in a series of papers, and has led to a virtual firestorm of interest in the condition.
Why do you think people are so heated about the controversy or the issue?
Well, I think what scientists frequently do is to string together a series of facts, and with those facts, usually there's some holes in the logic, and then those holes need to be filled in as they've made a hypothesis about how something might work based upon those series of observations that may or may not be logically connected. And that's hypothesis testing. And so there's been a story developed in terms of how this might be associated with MS and to what extent it might be causative for MS. And I think the controversy comes from whether or not all of the steps have been followed that can rigorously define the extent of the association and whether or not that association is causative, and then whether or not, if causative, it would lend to a specific kind of treatment based upon that set of theories.
Are there any findings that demonstrate that MS could be caused by venous insufficiency?
Well, so the observation, again, that was made primarily by Dr. Zamboni and partially confirmed by others, is that these apparent abnormalities on venography were associated with anatomical alterations using transluminal venography, a way of looking at the veins more directly with X-ray and contrast material. And that these abnormalities initially were described as being something that was specific or reasonably specific for MS, and something that wasn't seen in a variety of individuals, control patients or patients with other diseases. That enormous disparity between MS and other diseases would make you think that that association, being that strong, would lead to something that might be extremely important. Mm-hmm. So one of the important things is to find out if the association is really that strong. So far, it looks like that's beginning to erode, so that while more patients with MS may have this than patients in control groups, the difference may not be nearly as stark as was originally reported. So one of the things that needs to be done is to be sure how tight that association is and how valid the tools used for observation are.
Appreciating the fact that nothing is certain, and the way that clinical research works is, making sure that you're definitive in terms of things that are progressive, there is something that has garnered people's interest. And as a result, as somebody who has MS, who might feel that other techniques have not worked, who may be looking for some sort of treatment that could be helpful, would it be worth my while to get tested for a CCSVI insufficiency?
Well, the issue is not only whether or not one should be tested, but what one does with the results of the tests. And I think those two things go more or less hand in hand. So my own read of the situation at the moment is that we're not 100% sure how far one should go with this association, how strong it is, what the best ways to test for this is, let alone should we be taking that next leap in faith to believe that a surgical procedure, even if it's a relatively non-invasive surgical procedure, will solve an issue once and for all.
What kind of research is being done so far right now to kind of get to the point of making a determination about this?
Well, for the most part, people are doing observational studies to try to see whether or not the associations are strong. Perhaps some of the largest body of information so far has been generated at the University of Buffalo by Dr. Zavadinov. And that's when I mentioned earlier that the strength of the association had weakened. It really is in large part related to Dr. Zavadinov's studies, in which he's been following very carefully the approaches used by Dr. Zamboni, but hasn't seen such a black and white demarcation between the MS patient group and his control group. So already we have some information that would suggest that we need to do some further testing to be certain as to what the real landscape of this is, whether the association is as strong as suggested, and more importantly, or as important, how it actually fits into causing MS and whether or not it should be approached with some kind of a therapeutic maneuver.
What is the National MS Society doing to support the research that is now happening?
Well, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society and the Canadian MS Society, as well as several of the other national MS societies around the world, in a sense have pooled resources to put together a team of experts to look at a call for new research proposals that would generate information of the kind that we've already talked about needing in order to better understand the association. And it's my understanding that there have come to some conclusions as to where some of the better sites are to develop that kind of information and data, so that there will be sites in both Canada and the United States that will be pursuing this, in addition to those sites that have essentially spearheaded the concept.
How has it been for you as somebody that is involved with patients to see the reaction and trying to balance what you know as a medical professional with just plain faith and hope?
Well, one never wants to disturb or quash faith and hope. The problem is that I've been at this long enough that I've seen different things emerge in the MS landscape, and in other parts of medicine for that matter, from time to time, that superficially look very attractive, sometimes are fairly easy to see. I started to say see through, probably a bad choice of words, but at least to understand where there are major flaws in the way facts were put together to try to reach a conclusion. And usually when the information has been of enough interest and they've been investigated further, they've tended to die into the background. On the other hand, serendipity has worked on occasion. Yeah. And we also have examples of that. In fact, we even have that in some of our first-line immunomodulators for MS. We didn't develop the interferons because we thought they were immunomodulators. We were sure they were antivirals. Copaxone or gluteramine acetate wasn't developed because it was expected to treat the disease. It was supposed to cause something like the disease in animals. So we're, even in MS, full of surprises and serendipity or interesting observations for the open-minded scientists are sometimes very important. So the issue here is, how important is this observation?
This one is especially complicated because the procedure you would have to have done is actually non-invasive. Is that correct?
Well, it's invasive in the sense that a catheter has to be put into the vein. Yeah. That catheter has to be wheeled through a very delicate system that's carrying blood through it to different parts of the venous system, first to interrogate the system to see what it looks like, and then if there are alterations that can be approached by ballooning, some people think stenting, then those procedures need to be carried out. And they will or will not always work, and they may or may not always be as safe as people believe they are. And even if temporarily successful in apparently restoring a pathway of flow toward a more normal appearance, may not hold up for an adequate period of time to even understand if they could be helping the individual.
Well, I very much appreciate, it's nice as a patient to have a neurologist who gives a very fair and balanced perspective of something that is a very heated issue. So I really appreciate it. If you would like to get more information on CCSVI and other research developments, go to www.nationalmssociety.org. This is Kate Milliken for MS Learn Online. Thank you for joining us.